Hello again. Welcome back for another week of World Regional Geography. This week we begin our world tour, so to speak. Last week we ended our 2 week introduction, I suppose, opening sections, laying down the groundwork of the geographical concepts. And by the way, I've been skimming your discussion questions. It's Sunday as I speak, Sunday afternoon. I have enjoyed what I've been reading. So I know they're due tonight. I know those questions are due tonight, Sunday night. So I'll get into them Monday and Tuesday. And you guys are going above and beyond what you needed to do, from what I could see. But generally, ever since I've been doing this, it's been a while. Students, they do what they have to do. They're one or two responses, and that's it. And they generally do a fine job. But these look really good. Just saying. So, an early congrats on that. I look forward to digging into those a little deeper. So, yeah, congrats. You guys are certainly, what they would say, pleasing the prof. Okay. So our world tour begins with Europe. And if we were together in a class, I would ask you to think of a country. Write down a country and jot down 3 things you know about the country, or what you think you know. But we're not together. We cannot do that. So I'm going to get this kicked off here by looking at the objectives of the course, where we want to go. Talk about some of the heads-up terms, as I like to do. We're going to recognize that the objectives here, you see this on your lecture model, and hopefully everyone has their lecture models, right? Lecture models out, graphic organizers, okay? So recognize the role of capitalism in Europe's rise to global dominance. Understand the influence of the Cold War upon Europe's political and geographic formation. We want to trace Europe's cultural roots. And I kind of want to look at Yugoslavia, the soap opera nature of the former Yugoslavia, not around anymore, the formation of it, and what's happened since. Some of the major heads-up terms here. Capitalism, we're talking about individuals who keep and own, individuals and corporations, I should say, keep and own their profits. Imperialism, talking here about conquering cultures. The Industrial Revolution, going from an agricultural to an industrial society, begins in Great Britain, circa 1830s. The nation-state ideal. Each state, country has its, their own sovereign laws that need to be recognized and accepted. Genocide, extermination. Talking about extermination. Democratic centralization, communism. NATO, the North American Treaty Organization. The EU, that's the European Union. Supranationalism, not super, supranationalism, international cooperation. Devolution. No, wait a minute, where am I going to go here? Centralization. Yeah, devolution, less from national governments. People want less of the government in their hair. Euro regions makes it easier. It's a concept to make it easier for bordering towns and cities to be able to cross country, international boundaries and do business. Agglomeration economy, invest where facilities already are happening, where the markets already are a reality. Deindustrialization, right? This is where manufacturing has fallen off. seen that here in the United States. Guest workers, right? Guest workers kind of targeted toward Middle Easterners that were coming into Europe to work, find work, and they basically, you can come into work, but you have to go home. And set limits on how long someone could stay. The Velvet Divorce and Velvet Revolution, as the Eastern Bloc was crumbling, countries began to seek their independence, and they were able to do it without any bloodshed. And it was, the Soviets could see the handwriting on the wall, and they basically let people. They granted them their independence without much trouble. And then the Westphalian system, probably could have had this up there with the nation state. Westphalian system, after the religious wars, the European countries got together in 1600s and said, look, we've got to stop killing each other over these things. And so it was international dialogue, the first of its type, and it basically recognizes the ideal of the nation state. So there you have that. Now I want to get into, if you have your lecture model, I want to get into the first concept here, European influence and diversity. And want to set this up. The origins of modern globalization can be traced back to the emergence of Europe as a global power in the 15th and 16th centuries. And by the way, you might want to have your, you will want to have your textbooks open. I'm going to do a lot of visuals that will be very helpful. Page 70. So through technological advances and political conquest, Europeans laid the foundation for political, economic, and cultural interconnection that exists today throughout the throughout the world, really. So, and there are four sub-districts, four sub-regions within the continent Europe. You have Western Europe, you have Northern Europe, Mediterranean, and East Central. The industrial countries of Western Europe are largely responsible for Europe's emergence as a global leader. Okay, while Northern Europe has a high standard of living too, despite having relatively harsh environment. Mediterranean Europe is noteworthy for its distinct climate and early influence of the Greek and Roman civilizations. East Central Europe continues its integration with the rest of the region as a post-communist political and economic entity, and their identity continues to evolve as a result of that. So those smaller than the many of the other regions that we're going to be taking a look at in the course, Europe is nonetheless a complex region. Politically, it's divided into 38 countries, including 5 microstates. Some of the smaller countries in the world are there. European political boundaries have been drawn and redrawn numerous times throughout history. And really it's a process that continues into the 21st century. Key elements of the modern world emerged from Europe, including capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, and the idea of the nation state. So let's break this down here. European influences and diversity, conflict and technical innovation, and migration of peoples. I'm going to break this down into 2 clusters. The first cluster, culture groups, have some white space there, I believe, to be writing on, right? And you can put that down to number 1, culture groups, colon, the Germanic and Slavic peoples. The Germanic and Slavic peoples. Um, First bullet point there, Vikings. The Vikings mixed north. They mixed north, moved north. That's the word I'm looking for. They moved north into Scandinavia as seafaring people, right? Seafaring, maritime people. Then you have the Slavs. The Slavs settled in the middle of modern Germany and as far south as the Adriatic Sea, and even east into the Balkans. Again, map 70, you can see these groups. Um, Number two, culture groups, the Greeks and the Celts. Greeks, Celts, and Romans. Greeks, Celts, and Romans. I'm not going to dwell on the Romans here, but they were the third of this, culture group here that emerged. The Greeks inhabited the southwest corner of Europe. They were established by 1000 BC. The Celtic group, Central and Western Europe, remnants of language and culture, Welsh, the Scots, and the Irish. Page 81 in your textbook. I'll turn to that. Figure 310 is a good inset map for you there to look at in that regard. It gives you the language groups and where they are, and a nice choropleth map there. Now, next point here is the rise of European global power. And you have a blank there, and what you need to write there is capitalism. Capitalism, this is the practice of individual corporations owning business and keeping profits. Its origins are in the Mediterranean area and Western Europe. I think the Phoenicians, back around 1400s AD, 1450, they were trading dye and cloth in the Mediterranean area. Maybe started there. I would say for sure, probably during the Protestant Reformation, the Swiss Reformation under John Calvin out of Geneva, Switzerland, and biblical edicts of, if you don't, you've got to work, right? Laziness is a sin. And so I think, not to overgeneralize, but I would say from there, it really takes off. Portuguese were capturing slaves for expeditions. The Spanish followed suit and began the era of colonialism, right? Colonialism and imperialism, which is basically the conquering and crushing cultures, radically altering economies. Then you have the Industrial Revolution. Right? Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain circa 1830s and spread across the English Channel into the European continent. Figure 311 on page 83 gives you an inset of the industrial centers of Europe by 1900, right? Some 60, 70 years later after the sparks are set off of the Industrial Revolution in England. Let's take a look at the modern countries, the nation states, right? Modern countries and nation states. The Westphalian system, right? The Westphalian system led an international system of religious toleration after religious wars and international dialogues. First time you see this, international dialogue, still referred to today, and this leads to the concept of the nation state. Now, the nation state ideal, we talk about the nation state ideal, basically it is each nation shall be free to govern itself, right? Govern itself and only in its own territory, only in its own country. So the idea of the nation state, and that's countries, right? Countries with common characteristics, was first realized through the I think through the French Revolution and ultimately Napoleon, early 1800s, and it proves to be an efficient form of government. However, as so often happens with mankind, we come up with some really good ideas, we solve problems, but then we get off the other end of the horse, right? And wreck something. And nationalism grows, right? With this concept of nation state, nationalism grows in Europe, and the state becomes intolerant, culminating in genocide. You have the the Turkish Muslim government um, just exterminating, hundreds of thousands of Armenian Christians from 1916 to 1915 to 1923. And then, of course, we know, the extermination of millions of Jews between 1939 and 1945. Now, I want to cover natural environment, but we're not going to break that down. This isn't something I'm going to require you to know for the quiz, but just for just for FYI, right? And I can't read my writing. I have a map there for where you could go see that. Check it out. If you're interested, flip through the chapter 3, and find out where the climates are. But in spite of its northerly location, Rome lies really at the same latitude as Boston or Detroit here in the States. Europe's dominated by mid-latitude western coast climates. Maybe the perfect climate, right? Mild winters, right? Sounds good. Cool summers, right? The presence of large water bodies on all but the eastern side of the region, coupled with the warming influence of the North Atlantic Drift, keep all but the far northern areas mild. Mountain ranges are found in northern and southern Europe, and a large lowland area extends from France across Germany and Poland and over into Russia. The lowlands contain many navigable waterways, which enable landlocked countries to be fairly well connected with coastal areas as well. So Europe's blessed with abundant natural resources, particularly those spurred by the Industrial Revolution. So there's your natural environment. I want to head into the modern countries. Take a look at the modern countries of Europe, and let me transition us into that by saying that since the end of World War II, Europe has undergone substantial and consequential political and economic change. Cold War, political, military, and economic alliances dominated right up until the Soviet Union fell at the very end of 1991. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the European Union, the EU, developed in the 1970s to invest large sums of money to improve infrastructure of lagging regions, and has emerged as a dominant force for economic and political integration in the region. The political unification in Europe of the entire region seems kind of unlikely at this point, as devolution pressures, locals desiring less rule from their national governments exists in several countries, and that was embodied in Brexit, right? With Britain. One of your in the news topics deals with Brexit. Just a side note with Brexit, kind of an FYI. I don't know if your articles will cover this. It may. Brexit was kind of funny. Brexit kind of broke on age and region in England. The older you got, the more you're inclined to say, forget the European Union. They've done nothing for us. Let's get out. The millennials and younger voters wanted to stay in the European Union. Around London and the metropolitan areas in the south generally wanted to stay. As you started to go north, it was devolution pressure right there, devolution sentiments. Get out of the European Union. But so it's a wealthy region. Many European countries are experiencing low or zero population growth rates. The region is also overwhelmingly urban, and that's a reflection on the economic focus of urban-based manufacturing. Let's take a look at this here. Break this down in your lecture models. Europe after 1945, the communists argued for democratic centralism. And that was the belief that the Communist Party is the party of the working class, right? The only true representatives with the right to govern people. You had NATO and the European Union. NATO, the North American Treaty Organization. NATO was created in 1949 to counter the Soviets, military alliance. Soviets are now, well, the Russians. Soviets dissolved, but the Russians were already, Russia was the biggest, the biggest country of that federation, and certainly the political nerve center in Moscow, right, were the Russians. And the Russians are now a partner of NATO, but still not a member. The European Union, formerly the EEC, the European Economic Community, was developed in the 1970s, investing large sums of money to improve infrastructure of any lagging regions. Supranationalism is where differing nations cooperate for mutual benefit. They have the same policies in a lot of ways, military policies, economic policies. Again, this was spearheaded by the European Union. Figure 312 on page 86 and 313 over in 87. Page 87 are some inset maps of NATO countries and the European Union, the countries that are in the European Union. And of course, England's not with the European Union anymore. I think your author's this book is a little before Brexit. Well, a little bit before Brexit. So you have that. Devolution within European countries. Devolution, locals desiring less rule from their national governments. Euro regions, the idea here was basically folks on the borders were looking to make border, they wanted to cross borders easier to go do business in towns just across the border. And the European Union looked to make that easier. The concept of Euro regions, just doing general business. And on page 92, figure 317 relates to this concept. Yeah, the Upper Rhine, Europe. the Upper Rhine Euro region. So you'll notice the close proximity of French, German, and Swiss cities. So that close proximity make it easier to get across the border, do business, right? Population patterns. Population patterns in Europe. Zero population growth. Zero population growth. Mediterranean, East Central European countries have had decreases in population growth. There have been small increases in Western and Northern Europe. Page 93, figure 319 and 321 have some figures there, some age-sex diagrams on, I believe, several countries maybe. And then you have your demographic transition model on page 93. We looked at that last chapter. So changes in Europe's economic geography. Agglomeration economies. When we talk about agglomeration economies, this is investing in production facilities that were already established. They were already established with a proven labor force. Deindustrialization, manufacturing jobs fell off and factories became defunct in older areas in Europe. Planning and privatization. Britain led the way in privatizing these stagnant old state-run businesses, and unemployment decreased as a result. It's one of the arguments here in the United States with the education system. A lot of proponents would like to see the education establishment privatized. They feel a private sector would be able to give education and the populace out there better bang for its buck, right? And in a way, this is kind of what happened in Europe. You had these old state-run businesses that were dying off, and this isn't a knock on hardworking government employees, but a lot of people who go work in government or who are movers and shakers in government, they're by and large theoreticians, right? They're theoreticians. They know the blueprint of how to run things, how to, or what they think should be, how budgets should be operated, and fiscal policy. But a lot of those folks don't have real world experience in business. So when these stagnant old government run entities were dying off, they were sold to private investors, and unemployment decreased. I mean, the business people knew how to make that work. I'm going to talk now about the countries of Western Europe. Through colonialism and the Industrial Revolution, Western Europe dominated international relations from 1600 to the early 2000s. Western Europe is the most, what's the word I'm looking for here, or phrase, economically powerful of Europe's subregions. Although the subregion continues to be a leader in manufacturing, employment in the service sector, that now accounts for a majority of the jobs in the region, which is not that much different from the United States or really any place else, right? Manufacturing jobs are down, and service sector, tertiary sector is kind of where it's at economically. So get my bearings here. All right, yes. Got a little white space there. I knew that was coming up. That's what was confusing me here. The hub for human rights organizations, right? Europe is the hub for human rights organizations. The Red Cross out of Switzerland, the Geneva Convention, formed in 1864, the International Court of Justice in The Hague, right? They assess war criminals, right? War crimes. So a lot of big global organizations in Europe, right? In Europe. Well, let's take a look at the countries. And on page 106, you can see an inset map there of Western Europe. We're going to take a look at Western Europe. You can see a visual of the map. First country we want to talk about here is France. Two of them, France and the UK, the United Kingdom. France became a nation state in 1789 after the French Revolution. Centralized government decisions come from Paris. In the UK, you have Northern Ireland, right? The Irish nationalism versus the loyalists who want to stay with England. The nationalists want all of Ireland united. Ireland for the Irish, right? Both the French and the British were imperialists and colonizers, although they withdrew from that certainly by the early 60s. But they remained very much involved with those former colonies. Then you have the Low Countries. Turn to page 109, figure 331, I think it is. Page 109, the Low Countries, otherwise known as the Benelux countries. Belgium, BE, NE, the Netherlands, and then Lux, right? Luxembourg. So the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And then you have the Alpine countries. The Alpine countries, Austria, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, 62 square miles, of it, right? Well, I think the fourth smallest country in the world. Austria grew into one of the Europe's longest and largest dynasties under the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs dynasty reigned from 1440 to early 1800s, an incredibly long time. Modern Austria has most of the German-speaking regions of the former empire before World War I. The Swiss are made up of 26 cantons. They're like counties. Power comes from the local cantons instead of the federal government, right? A lot of conservatives in the United States like that idea. And then you have Germany, right? The wealthiest of the Western European nations. Page 110. All right, you can see that on page 110. 16 provinces, made up of 16 provinces. The people ethnicity and culture. Immigrant workers, guest workers who could stay as long as work was available. Get your green card, right? Stay as long as work is available, but always, you'll always be foreigners, expected to go home, right? Expected to go home. And then Muslim terror in Europe, right? Our alleged Muslim terror in Europe has been an issue over the past 20 years. In fact, I would bet that when you if anyone investigates the Brexit offering in the news, I would bet that this will not be covered. But just listen to me on this. The biggest thing, Brexit was like if you had a pie there and you had the different pieces. I think the biggest piece, not how big it was, the biggest piece that drove Brexit was the immigration. European Union's pretty much open border policies with immigration, and it's not politically correct to focus on that with Brexit. When people do talk about it, they do get to it, but that was really the biggest thing I think that drove Brexit. There were a lot of atrocities, religious atrocities, let's put it that way, uh, in England and elsewhere around Europe, but in England, and a lot of the English were like, had enough of this, and we need to get out of the European Union and control our borders better, really. I'm just telling you. I know it's not politically correct to say that, and a lot of your periodicals, when they talk about Brexit, they almost say that in passing, but that was it. That was really the biggest thing. Now, lastly, I want to talk about Yugoslavia. I don't know about Yugoslavia. I should probably say this too, before I get to Yugoslavia, just in passing here. Mediterranean Europe, not going to dwell on that as much. Located on the peninsula of southern Europe, page 116, inset map there for you to look at. Let's do that. Give southern Europe and Mediterranean area. A little love here, right? Mediterranean European countries, they represent some of the oldest civilizations. I touched on that earlier. In Europe, the historic centers, coupled with the subregion's warm climate and numerous islands and beaches, and made tourism a major industry. However, only Italy's GDP approaches that of the Western European countries. So on page 120, you can take a look at figure 330. Italy's going to be recovering now because of the coronavirus pandemic, right? Really hit there early and hard because it's a really old population. Probably a lot of respiratory issues with the elderly population. That happens all over, right? Let's take a look here. Yugoslavia. Let me see. I've got separate notes for that. Yugoslavia, the story, I call it. Yugoslavia, the story. And what a story it was and is. Turn to page 125. Yeah, you really need to see some visuals for this. Really sordid story. Page 125, figure 345 is one of them. And we'll start off with Serbia and Montenegro. They were independent. They were independent prior to World War One. And both achieved territory during the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. The Slovenes and the Croats lost independence in the Middle Ages. So they were now a part of Austria and the Austria-Hungary Empire. And you see that in figure A on page 125. This is all before World War One. So late 1800s, the Serbs looked to take territory in Austria-Hungary that contained fellow Slavic peoples. They were also upset that Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908. So in 1914, a Serb nationalist assassinated Austria-Hungary's Archduke in Sarajevo. In 1919, Yugoslavia came into existence. The Serbs, the Croats, and the Slovenes. And the idea there was we cannot have, I mean, that was kind of blamed for starting World War One, and in part it was. And the world community, the new League of Nations, were like, we can't have that happening again. All these disparate, hating each other, all these culture groups and borders, they hate each other. So we have to monitor them. We'll put them together, right? We'll put them together. But um, that kind of solves itself in a weird way a little bit later. I'll get to that. 1929, it's officially dubbed Yugoslavia. The Slovenes and Croats are Roman Catholic. The Serbs and the Macedonians, the Bulgarians are Eastern Orthodox. So you see some potential issues there. The communists gained control after World War II of this region. So any nationalism that was going to raise its head was suppressed by the Soviet tanks, right? So the Soviets began to displace people. You get Croats living over in Bosnia-Herzegovina and so forth. You start splintering people that hate each other. And the Soviets did this all around their empire, but they knew it would work here. And what they wanted was to get people so distracted from what they were doing in Moscow, because they were hating each other, in their own local regions. Not nice guys, right? Not nice people, what they did, but they did that. So this kind of promotes and they promoted the Yugoslavia idea, right? They promoted that idea. And they tapped a guy named Tito, to, oversee that area. And when Tito died, he did well. When Tito died, all these old resentments began to resurface. So in 1991, when the Soviet Union did finally collapse, Slovenia and Croatia declared their independence. And you could see figure 345, figure B, I believe it is, on 125. The Yugoslavia did attempt to prevent that. Belgrade began to help the Serbs in Croatia establish their own country. Bosnia-Herzegovina moved toward independence, but was split between Muslim Serbs and Croats. Again, all wanted their independent republic, and all chaos at that point broke loose. In the early 90s, 1995, we had the Dayton peace accords that divided it up, and that's on, you can see that on page 120. Macedonia was left landlocked, and the problem there is it's very poor, probably why the Serbs didn't come after it. And then the Albanians, they were looking for their own territory as well, right? A lot of tension. Serbs were the majority, and this is part of the problem too. The Serbs were a majority of Yugoslavia, and they saw money. They saw money as being wasted on all these different minority groups. So Slobodan Milosevic came to power. He was Serbian nationalist. He comes to power and in the mid-90s and begins a campaign of ethnic cleansing, and he's finally tried for war crimes, but he's doing all this through what's left of the Yugoslavian army, placed in prison and tried for war crimes, dies in a jail in The Hague in the 2000s. So, and there you have it, Europe, chapter 3. You have your graphic organizers wrap it up and talk about what's up ahead. Europe, we took a look today at Europe is a modern nation. The Westphalian system, the first international dialogue, is in Europe. To stop religious wars, to basically set up the nation-state ideal that each nation is its own sovereign entity, and really it's not much of anyone else's business what religion they want to have at that point in time, economic system they want. We have to agree to disagree about these things. After World War II, the culture groups. culture groups. You have the Greeks, the Romans, and the Celts, but before that, the Vikes and the Vikes and the Slavs. Uh, after After that, you have the rise of Europe, capitalism via the Portuguese, slave trade, colonialism, the Industrial Revolution. I would maybe even throw in earlier than that the Swiss Reformation under John Calvin, probably where the whole idea and practice gets started. After World War II, the Iron Curtain, right? Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain, descending down the middle of Europe, right? You have supranational organizations like NATO, the European Union, and the United Nations that are set up to ensure peace militarily, diplomatically, economically. NATO militarily, the United Nations politically, and the EU economically. Fall of communism, right? Fall of communism starts happening late 80s. It's dead and gone last week of 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolves. Since that time, devolution pressures. People in Europe want less of their government, right? Less federal government. Euro regions have been set up to make border crossing easier, to do business. Zero population growth, pretty much the norm in Europe. And then lastly, Yugoslavia, right? Just talked about Yugoslavia. There's a lot to say there. You can look at the graphic organizer because I'm starting to get out of breath here. I still have a little bit more to talk about, so you can see that there. All right, what's up ahead this week? Prediction guides. Prediction guides are on the course page. I have an example of how to do those and the purpose of them, right? You can see that in the directions of the activity. And again, this is another way of supplying you with a comprehension exercise based off the subject matter covered, and this is going to show up. It's kind of juxtaposed with the forthcoming quiz, okay? In the news, the in the news for this chapter is on the course page under the in the news section. I kind of changed around some of the modules and some of the assignments. What's an assignment? The assignments are basically now going to be the activities during the week, or I'm going to have in the news have its own module and so forth. Figuring this out, so I kind of bumped my way through Canvas and learning it, how I want to use things. Thing about in the news too, and I mentioned this to several of you, you're only to pick one topic, right? Some of you guys did it well, but you're going through each bullet point and just summarizing. Just pick one topic, right? Pick one topic, research it, follow the rubric, right? I need a reaction, a good reaction, some kind of a source, right? Look at the rubric. And then finally, term paper topics, right? Term paper topics, be sure to look at the syllabus about that to see when I need that, because I'm sure the due date of the topic, and when I talk about the topic, we're talking about a country of choice. I think the train's coming around the mountain on that, right? So if I don't get that, then points are taking off, right? I think 1 percentage point for each day it's late. And this is going to be a first come, first served thing. I'll have a chart up on our course page to let you guys know what's been taken, right? I'll try to keep that up as updated as quickly as I can. So be sure too to investigate the Economic Freedom Index just by simply Googling it. That's how you'll find out about it. That way I think you'll be better informed perhaps in picking a country for your topic of study. And of course, see the paper guidelines on how to do the paper. And I expect questions, right? That's not going to be a problem. I can also help you there as well. So I think that's it. I think that's it for this week. So I will see you next Monday. Until then, you guys be very tremendous, and I will see you. I'll talk to you later. All right. Bye-bye.